I like to say, like, if you're a seed, pre-seed founder in this market, focus on building traction, focus on acquiring customers. And the best validation is people willing to pay you and come back and pay you every month. If everyone knew the AI gold mine was gonna happen, right? People would have already been there doing it. It's because we started a few years earlier. There was a market opportunity to do the things right, set the foundation up.
Welcome back, everybody, to Founders Corner. In today's episode, I have a very special guest for you. His name is Krish Ramineni, and he is the CEO of Fireflies.ai, a AI bot that basically goes into your meetings, keeps all the notes, and then you have something to reference back to. Krish, very excited to have you here. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm excited. Thanks for having me, and this will be fun.
Yeah. So what I'm excited about having you on here is you've walked the whole line, right? You've been a founder yourself. You started this thing from nothing. COVID hit. You've gone through the ringer, and I'm very excited for you to share some of your experiences with our audience, and also, you know, who doesn't like to talk about AI, right? So especially right now, it's a buzzword. So I'm very excited to get your take on it and all, and see what's coming up. So why don't we start first with, give us your history. Like, what's Krish? Who's Krish? How did you get here?
Yeah, I think my journey started when I moved to California when I was 5 years old. Basically grew up in Silicon Valley's backyard. Went to school on the East Coast, spent time and quite a bit of time actually in the East Coast around Philly. And then I was working at Microsoft in Seattle. And after that, I've been back and forth between the East Coast and West Coast. And we decided to get our business started off in San Francisco. And it's been an interesting journey, because I started working when I was 20. So it's been an interesting journey over the last 5-6 years.
Very nice. And what made you decide to go to San Francisco? I mean, we can always guess, but like, what was your reasoning behind it?
I think the biggest one was, at the time, we felt like that's where we were going to find early adopters, investors. This was the place to be for tech. So we decided that would be like where I wanted to be. In fact, me and my co-founder went back and forth because he wanted to be based in Boston, right, and I wanted nothing to do with the East Coast.
Why? So what's your hate towards the East Coast?
I just felt like for a software company, there is something unique about being in the Bay Area and being around other software companies. At the time, that was my thought process. The funny thing is, my co-founder is in New York now, and I go back and forth between Seattle, where I'm based, and California. So starting off, it was really important. There's that serendipity, especially when you don't have a network, where you meet other founders, other folks in tech, and there's incredible value to that. But we're also a 100% globally distributed company. Right. So it doesn't matter where we are. Like, we went, we're everywhere in the world. So as an org, it doesn't matter now.
Krish, I actually love that you said that, because I do believe that, like, the biggest asset that Silicon Valley actually provides you is the fact that you're talking about meeting entrepreneurs every single day that are so impactful to your business, and you get to learn from them. And you and I've had this conversation already about how it's like, for a founder, first time going into a desert without a map. And I feel like Silicon Valley is the closest thing to giving you some sort of direction or a map. Do you agree with that?
I would absolutely say so, because you get to see what other people are doing. Right. And use that as a way to reference yourself and say if you're going in the right direction or not. And it can also be a double-edged sword, because there's a lot of people that do not so smart things, burn a lot of money, and chase the hype. So you have to balance that as well with reality. I think because my co-founder was from outside Silicon Valley, and I grew up with a level of skepticism, so we were able to take the good of it, but also leave behind some of the unnecessary hype that's given to certain things that
Like
that shouldn't be
AI,
delivered.
blockchain, Web3. Because I've been to Silicon Valley, right? Like it is the playground for software. It is the place to be. The problem is it's too much of a hype place. So you almost like, if you come up with a really good business idea that just is very good and it can make millions and it could be great, they almost like look at you like, yeah, you're not new enough for us. You know what I mean? Like you have to hit a home run every single time. That's sometimes I feel is the issue with Silicon Valley. What are your thoughts around that?
That's interesting you say that. I think that there was a mindset maybe 2020, 2021 in
Mm-hmm.
the world where you have to run 1,000 miles per hour and you have to take some of these bets
Yeah.
that may not necessarily pan out. But
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, your focus should be on like delivering value to customers. And as a byproduct of that, spending your time, resources, and energy there. And if you build a good business as a result of that with good fundamentals, thinking from a first principles point of view, de-risking a lot of the core challenges that come along the way, you know, you'll go the distance, right? Like regardless of competition, regardless of this crazy hype cycle.
Right.
Where I think things get distorted is people looking at that 5 to 10% of the hype and thinking that is the entire industry.
I agree.
So yeah, there's incredible technology that's come out of Silicon Valley, right? From the social networks of the world to Chat GPT recently. So there is incredible merit to all the amazing thing that happens here, and I'm so grateful to be from there. The challenge, I think, is balancing that with a healthy amount of skepticism
Right.
and making sure that that like, do you really need to like do these things? Do you need to actually deploy that much capital? Does everyone need to go and train LLMs and spend hundreds of millions of dollars? So sometimes when there's one pattern of play, everyone tries to copy that playbook.
Yes.
And that's
Yes.
what I caution against more than anything else. Because usually, if you're in the world of venture, I'm not a venture capitalist, I do spend time with venture capitalists, you are trying to pattern match, right? And so if you found one successful company and they did A, B, C, and D really important, like in a particular way, maybe the only thing that really mattered was A, but you're focused on B, C, D, and E to be the exact same. And you're telling all these other companies to follow that same playbook. But in
Yes.
my mind, venture is like about finding outliers. So if you're
Yes.
trying to pattern match everyone, then no one is really an outlier, right? So
No.
that's an oxymoron in my world.
That's a perfect way to do it and say it. Actually, is the pattern recognition, and I say most VCs that do that, they truly don't understand the business model. They're just trying to hit home runs. That's all they're trying to do, and they're very much lacking the ability to look at it from a business perspective rather than looking at it strictly an investment perspective, which I think is the you're bang on. It's wrong because every company can achieve X, but they can take different paths to X. Right, it's not always the same path. So I love that. What would you suggest? Like, being an entrepreneur yourself, starting something so new, because you started. When did you start Fireflies.ai?
So the actual voice AI technology we started working on in 2018, 2019
So
time period.
that was
Before
new.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, before that, 2017, 2016, 2017, when we were working on NLP, all of this stuff, many years before generative AI and before any of this stuff was cool.
Yeah.
We were working on this. And so people say,
That's
well,
why
you
I was.
got the timing right. How can you say we got the timing right when we were 5 years early to market and the technology wasn't mature enough? We just made sure that we persisted and hung around and survived. And some of the tailwinds you get from this generative AI hype uh, helped accelerate the business, but the business wasn't built around hype. It was already there. We just were able to capture some of that attention, the technological improvements. So when people say you got the timing right, and I think
They're
it's very
so
hard to time market.
misinformed. And that's kind of what bothers me too is you know, a lot of these companies, like even if you look at Elon Musk, like I'll go big names, right? Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, everyone's like, oh wow, they're like an overnight success, like they just did it. And it's like, did they? I mean, it took them 10 years to like become an overnight success, right? Like they worked their butts off, they went through hell and high water, like they're like, and that kind of goes back to you, right? It's like everyone's kind of mentioning to you now, oh wow, you guys got the timing right. It's like we were 5 years before and no one was even looking at us. Like it was a struggle to get through that. But I always say this to entrepreneurs. I say grit is why this is why I say grit is so important in founders, because it is like you if you put five founders together and look at like three of them being successful and two of them being failures, the only failure was because they quit, right? They couldn't figure it out or something happened. They just couldn't solve the problem. They had to give up. The other three, they just didn't give up. They just kept going and going and going. Their vision, it was almost like a thing, right? So I always tell that there's no such thing as an overnight success. Like you, I love what you've done because you actually made sure the product is solid. You worked with your customers, and that's kind of what I want to talk to you about next. Is how hard was it to talk to your customers, build the product around your customer when you were having, people weren't really talking about AI?
I think one is, can this technology even work? And where it
Yeah.
joins all your meetings, it takes notes for you. That sounds so much sci-fi, like in a movie. Like everyone wants like a Jarvis-like assistant,
Yeah.
uh, and you're trying to build that. Is that even technically feasible? And then once we built that, they're like, well, is it actually even going to be accurate? And the transcription and the notes, so forth. And we had to do a lot of work there. And then the next phase was like, well, how do you personalize it, right? Because the way a machine takes notes is never going to surpass how a human takes notes. And then with generative AI, so each layer of risk that you peel away um, helps you get more product market fit and helps people realize like that it can happen. And to be honest, I wasn't so sure in the beginning either, because when we first started, transcription wasn't that great,
No.
and the user experience might not have been that great.
Hmm.
And you have to be able to channel out some of the negativity and know that in the next couple of years it will get better. And
Right.
so hope is really your biggest driving factor, and grit, right? To be able to keep controlling what's in your control and improving that. So I think that companies, if everyone knew the AI gold mine was going to happen, right? People would have already been there doing it. It's because we started a few years earlier. There was a market opportunity to do the things right, set the foundation
Hang
up,
on.
right? It's
Uh,
not about going to the gold rush, a week after it's been announced, right? You should already be there and then discover that where you're at can turn into a gold rush. So I give a lot of credit to my co-founder in terms of when he saw the market, we talked to venture capitalists, we said that we fundamentally believe there will be a time when transcription will be near perfect. It'll do
yeah.
better than what humans can do. And the natural language processing and technology will be so good that you won't be able to tell the difference between human generated notes and AI generated notes. And for now, it needs to be good enough to get off the ground. Um, but we will make it great over time. And so
How did?
that's conviction.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm with you because one of the biggest things is how did you overcome? Like, look, I love customers. They're the reason we survive. They're the reason we live. They're the reason we do everything. One of the biggest pet peeve of mine is like when you're talking to them, you kind of mentioned, look, we're in beta, we're just launched, blah blah blah. When you talk to them, they're kind of like, well, you don't have this feature, you don't have that feature, you don't have this feature, and they start listing all these things where it's like, okay, you're admitting that what I've built is perfect, like it's great, it works perfectly for you, but you also want these little things, but you don't want to sign a contract yet because you're just waiting to see if I can make that happen. How do you overcome that from a startup perspective? Because a lot of our listeners, they're seed, they're pre-seed, startups. So, what would you advise to them for something like that?
I think some companies have really good salespeople that can go convince people to buy the product, sell them on the vision. To be honest, we weren't the best at sales, and we didn't take that route. We said, we're going to be brutally honest. We're going to be super transparent. You can judge us however you want. This is where the state of the thing is. And if some other competitor says that it's better than this, we'll know for a fact, because we're continuing to be on the cutting edge and continue to improve the product. So as soon as there is some sort of technological groundbreaking discovery, we'll be the first to adopt it. That was my mindset, that it's going to get better and we're going to be ready to adopt it, and then allowing them to make a decision based on that. So those early customers are those that are willing to take that leap of faith, that know for all your flaws are believing in your potential. And it takes time, right? Because you can't build a massive business in the early days without a proven technology, proven market, proven market strategy, all of those sort of things.
And that's why it takes years. That's why
it takes years of time. And sometimes people feel under pressure, especially founders that I mentor, other folks, that where their focus is on raising capital and trying to spend that capital quickly to grow before they have product market fit. And I think that's risky, where it's better to go slower in the early days and know that you have product market fit. And you will know, right? You'll be a hair on fire. You can't keep up with demand. Than it is to say, well, I'm going to artificially brute force product market fit by spending money on sales, throwing money at ads and doing acquisition. And it could work for some companies, in the social media space, it could work, but at the end of the day,
it won't last.
Are people willing to come back and keep using your service?
Bang on.
That's the most important thing.
I love that, because that's exactly what happens, right? Is there's this weird stigma that when you start a startup, you almost have to do everything within a year and a half. So it's almost I have to build in 6 months. Then in 1 year, I have to go and hit the seed rounds and start looking at investors. And then I have 18 months. And it's you realize all your effort is going into raising capital, and you keep shifting from business to that. You're not focusing on the business. You're not focusing on the customers. Why is that fundamental concept of a business gone in the startup world? I'm curious on your thoughts on that, because fundamentals are make sure you have customers, make sure your customers love you, make sure you understand. And I always jokingly say, you shouldn't be building an MVP, which is most valuable product. You should be building an MLP, most lovable product. That's kind of my theory behind it, is you should be building a product people love and they're willing to pay for, rather than focusing on raising capital. Where do you think that stigma came from, and why?
I think there is a time and place where you need some capital to get off the ground, especially if you're building a high scale startup. People are going to raise 100,000, 200,000, some sort of thing. We had to do that, and we had to bootstrap. It's not going to pay much, but it was enough to start building the initial segment of the product. The thing that I think happens, and where this is a really tricky situation, because you'll see this in the world of raising venture. Usually angel and seed stage investors are very patient, and they want you to be able to do the right things. At least the folks that we've interacted with, we're very grateful for our investors that believe in the long term about getting the technology right, proving product market fit, eliminating as much burn as possible. So amazing angels, our seed and Series A investors, we're always focused on that. But what I tend to see with folks is that, we've now raised capital, we have to deploy it. What's the point of it sitting in the bank? Yes. But you're deploying it on what? Yeah. And why do you need to go get a 10,000 square foot office? I'm being honest. There's people that are getting all these fancy things, versus you're playing the game of a startup, but you actually don't have a startup product. So that to me is something where we have the money, we have to now spend it. Our expenses are going to go up, and then we have to go raise. And then there was also this idea, and we were unfortunate enough to be in that position, because we had to have an MVP, we had to have data, we had to have customers, We had to have our VCs go talk to customers and say, is this good enough? Should I invest in it? So we had to go through all of that in the early stages, right? Whereas there were people coming out of Google, coming out of some of the big tech companies where they didn't have anything built. They didn't even have a pitch deck. They just had an idea and they said, hey, I'm an X engineer from X, or I'm an X PM from this place, who were able to raise several $1 million and then go figure out what they were going to use that money for to build something. Right?
Isn't that wild?
So,
isn't that wild? Okay, so I have a story for that. And it comes from what's that online streaming company that's really famous? It's getting a lot of heck nowadays. It got bought by Amazon, I believe. Twitch. Okay, so one of the co-founders of Twitch, he actually was famous, and he went online and said this himself. I think it was on his TikTok or Instagram. And what he ended up doing was he raised $100 million for his next idea. He raised $100 million and it went bankrupt after 2 years. And he openly says it. He's like, I realize raising money is actually a terrible idea, because they just kept pivoting. They had no idea what the product was yet. They were just trying to throw money at the problem and see what sticks. And it was such a negative experience. Well, they went bankrupt. Like, how do you go bankrupt with $100 million?
Yeah, I don't know the exact story of what happened there, but I do remember the way Twitch was built when he went through Y Combinator, where they were very lean, right? They probably got like $20,000.
Yes.
So there's that scrappiness. And again, there's companies that do well with capital, and again, credit to being a successful founder. So you have the ability to go raise that type of money.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing. And again, not to harp on like raising capital, but the most important thing I like to say is capital is extremely important to light the fire, right? VCs giving you capital is extremely important to light the fire. But if you are uncontrolled in raising that capital and deploying it, that same fire that's warming your house can burn the house down.
Yeah.
So it's very, very important to understand how you're going to be able to use it. And I know folks who've raised 100 million on like valuations that just don't make sense.
Yeah.
Where 2021, just because you're getting the money, there is no such thing as free money. Everything comes with strings attached.
You have to perform at that level. You have to perform.
You have to perform at that level. It is a steroid at the end of the day, and you may need it to get off the ground, right? Kickstart. But if you have to depend on it every single day, that is a risk. Yeah. So I always like to advise folks that raise capital when you actually know how you're going to deploy it. Some people will say, well, raise capital when you don't need it, because that's when people are willing to give it to you. Sure, there's merit to that. But sometimes it can taint your thinking, and it can make you wasteful in ways, and distract you. And I've actually seen companies where they're doing great, and then they raise capital, and then they go after 10 different initiatives, and it dilutes their core product. So even the biggest of companies who have hundreds of different product lines, is any one of them amazing, right? That's a question we have to ask ourselves. And it's usually maybe one or two that are amazing, but the others aren't. So what that tells me is you have to focus, especially when you have limited resources. And you can't be like dabbling in like 10 different channels for marketing, 10 different product ideas. Money sometimes gives you the ability to go run experiments in a good way, but it can also be negative and take your focus away. So I like to say, like, if you're a seed, pre-seed founder in this market, focus on building traction, focus on acquiring customers. And the best validation is people willing to pay you and come back and pay you every month, right? You get like a dozen of those customers, get to 50, get to 100, then figure out, okay, I'm ready to scale this up. Let me go raise some capital to go ignite like the top of the funnel and get more people through the door, or hire support folks to support these people. You are building these things with that interest. The last part of this whole idea of raising capital is sometimes some folks believe that they can build an amazing business by taking capital and then just going and hiring out folks that can do certain functions. Yeah. I've always found that when I go and roll up my sleeves and do something, understand the pain points, and then go hire for people to know like what they need to do, the chances of success with that hire is tremendously high. Whereas if there's a founder that says, I know nothing about marketing, I know nothing about sales, I just know that all these other companies hire a VP of sales at this phase, so I'm just going to go hire a great VP of sales who may or may not be the right one for your business, and then I'm gonna get carried by
Yeah.
them. I just haven't found folks where that have succeeded with that manner, or they have succeeded, but you had to waste a lot of money, hire and fire a lot of VPs in order to get there.
I call that the brute force mentality, which is basically like you're just hiring to like brute force it through. Which I get it. For some people, it might work. Like realistically, not all founders are like gold mines. Like not all of them are great at understanding how to do marketing, understanding how to do. But the problem becomes where they start getting, they hire an agency, like a lead gen agency. I biggest pet peeve is when startups hire lead gen agencies, because here's the thing: they say we've had success, but they've had success with companies that already know what their messaging is. They already know what their market is. They know exactly who they're targeting, how they're targeting, and what the problem statement is, and blah blah blah. You know nothing, so you're literally paying $5,000 USD every single month in hopes to get some leads, but they're shooting in the dark just as much as you're shooting in the dark. Same thing with VP of sales and marketing is like you end up hiring people and it's like, okay, good luck. Let me know how it goes. Like, I think hiring support for you is more important than hiring someone to replace you. Because I think all founders need to know how to sell. And I think that's a critical thing.
It's hard for me, but I had to learn it. I had to close the
learn
first 50, 100 deals, and then we had to figure out how to close it through self-service so people can go through the website, swipe their credit card, and buy it on their own without any sales assist. So all of these sort of things, we had to go through the journey. No one, in my opinion, has come in and magically figured things out for ourselves.
No.
And this may be controversial to people saying, well, maybe you don't have good talent, or maybe you need to hire like smarter people. But
You're
the reality
in Seattle
is,
and Silicon Valley. Those are the best two cities to hire any kind of tech talent. So I disagree with that. But go ahead.
I've consulted with folks. I've worked with advisors. You can take as much feedback or insights from people, and people will keep saying hiring is the most important thing. It is, but when to hire is really important, because we have a principle saying we're not going to hire until we feel the pain and we know that this can be done by someone else. So I don't believe in premature hiring at this point in time in our journey.
Yeah, no, I love that. Now, how, speaking of teams, how is it being a fully remote team? Because I'm always curious. I mean, we're a fully remote team as well. I'm just curious on how your experience has been. What have been the pitfalls, the good stuff, the bad? Because you're right. A lot of startups grab that like 10,000 square foot office. They start stacking with Macs and all these things. And you're just like, was that really necessary?
I did hear that a lot of AI startups are now filling up San Francisco, which is, I guess, it's good for the city that they're able to get folks and attracting people back. And it's good for those AI companies because they're raising tons of capital. So it's an exciting time where you have this interesting dichotomy in the market where maybe the rest of venture is not as hot, but like the AI space where we're in is still exciting. There's a lot of deals being done. So we'll see where this lands in 2024 and beyond. But for us, being remote was just like the way we like to operate. So me and my co-founder just felt we were more productive when we were remote. And again, this may be, again, counterintuitive to what a lot of the other companies say is you have to be in the office now. The party's over, the pandemic's over. You got to come into the office so that we can monitor you and that you're actually collaborating with your peers and not taking midweek Yosemite trips, which I know people have done that were working at some of these big tech companies who were not taking time off, but they were in the middle of the week in Yosemite, technically still working, maybe taking one or two meetings as a PM, and then like doing a hiking trip. And that blew my mind. So I get it. I get why the Facebooks of the world, the Googles of the world want these like people that they pay big bucks for to be back in the office.
I mean, I've heard
For us
someone,
being remote,
I've heard some devs have 2 jobs.
wow.
Yeah, so
So
like I've
that's
heard that
interesting.
too. Like, and I
Yeah.
think that's exactly what it is. I think the bigger guys, because you're hiring so many people, they're not working like a startup. A startup is very like, I can immediately see the impact or the non-impact you're going to have on my company. You're right there with me in the trenches. Whereas I think with Facebook and Google, like, I don't know what that one person that's like 20 rows below, like, I have no idea what you're doing. I have no idea how you're impacting the company. Nothing. Like, you being gone for a week makes no impact on that business overall. So I see that. Sorry, continue though.
No, yeah. For us, remote is also about hiring people that are a little bit more oriented towards uh, communicating through written and async. Like those are the important skills, and they don't have to be micromanaged. They're self-managed. They're accountable. So you do have to hire for a personality trait that best suits folks that want to work in a remote capacity.
Right.
And then you're working across many different time zones. So there's a little bit of that, right, where you may have to work a little bit over your regular working hours. So like there's some of those things that happen. But in the what I've seen is like in other places where commutes take 2 to 3 hours, that's 2 to 3 hours back to the folks
Yeah.
that you're not tired from taking that train or local subway. Uh, you're you're able to do the work you need to do from your home or your makeshift like office room, and that actually really encourages people, and that actually makes a lot of people want to come and work in Fireflies while the
Mhm.
rest of the world is going back to in person.
Yeah, and again, I'll go back to the fact that again, they know that their impact is so significant to the company that I think people actually work harder because of that. I think it's because like a lot of times these bigger companies, they're like, you got to come back, is because I got to watch you, because realistically they know what they're working on has no real impact, or they don't feel it, whether it is or true or not. That's kind of where the big company culture comes in. It like really kicks in, and you can tell, versus like a small business culture where it's like everybody's working hard, everybody knows everybody. Like, it becomes a lot more of a different impact. So I do believe most startups can actually get away with remote more significant than like the Facebook, the Googles. I'll even go oil and gas. Like the Exxons and all them. Like, Exxon doesn't trust nobody. You know what I mean? So I get that. Where do you see? We kind of talked about how AI is coming into Silicon Valley. It's taking over all the office spaces. We're hearing like AI startups without even a product are beginning evaluated at like $1 billion. I get why, because you need like an infrastructure. You need to build out the entire ML and like all the hardware you have to buy. Where do you see AI going from here? Like, because ChatGPT is kind of getting stupider over time, is kind of being reported, right? Because of the fact that people are feeding it really bad information. Now it's getting dumber. Like, where do you see AI going, and how do you see it impacting our economy and the startup world?
I think the companies that are raising tons of money usually are raising that to buy GPU capacity,
Correct.
train models.
Yeah.
They're taking this approach that I need to own the entire tech stack in order to do the things that I need to do.
Yeah.
And I
Doesn't
can
make sense
see
to me.
that like the open AIs, the Anthropics of the world,
Yep.
the Claudes of the world, where that makes sense. But is there going to be one winner? I don't know. Is there going to be like three big players? Maybe. Are there going to be a lot of smaller players building smaller models, open source potentially?
Yeah.
Are there going to be folks that are not infrastructure oriented, but they're going to anyway build out their own infrastructure for themselves? So I think like Reflection AI is building more of a end user product, but they're controlling their own models. So it's hard to tell what is going to be the right way or not. All I can say is NVIDIA is making a lot of money, and a lot of those VC dollars are going back up to NVIDIA.
What a
And
phenomenal
credit to them.
bet 10 years ago for
Yeah,
that guy, that he made a
that's
bet
the
on
thing,
AI.
right? Like it's like with the AI space that they're not an overnight success. They did all the hard
No.
work over the past decade, and now people are saying, "Oh, they knew all along this was going to happen." No,
Again,
you
it
never
was a
know.
bet. It was a
Yeah,
bet. Again, I hate when people say that. You know how much heck he probably got for saying we're going to go full focus on AI, everyone probably was like, dude, you're 20, 30 years early. You know what I mean? Like, if you talk to anybody 10 years ago, no one thought AI would be out and about now, like the way it is today. Like,
Yeah.
you know, besides, a lot of people also look at it going, oh, AI is such a new thing. No, AI has been around since the 80s. It was the AI winter. The computing power just couldn't catch up, right? So we've had AI for a long time. It's just been one of those things. What are your, where do you see AI impacting the most? Which industry, and like, besides meetings, of course, Fireflies.
Well, I think that knowledge workers are going to really be able to leverage AI both in the creative field. So I'm seeing what like Midjourney and some of these other guys are able to do, and I'm thoroughly impressed by the company that Midjourney has built.
Yeah, they
You know,
did bootstrap.
especially that there's big giants, and they're fully bootstrapped. I think they're 40 employees.
Yeah,
They're
it's
going to cross
insane.
like 100 or 200 million in revenue.
Gross.
Uh,
I love it.
and create insane culture. And they built everything on top of Discord, which is
Yes.
very, very surprising, right? Like, so again, they're an outlier, and that's a company that I think is something to watch out for. And I'm sure VCs definitely want to get in on the action there. We'll see if they'll do that or not.
Because they didn't build their own models. They utilized, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
they
have to look at like exactly how they
yeah,
built it or what they've owned. But there's a lot of other stuff like Dolly, right, in
yeah.
this space, and there's a few others that are working on this. Adobe's got some stuff as well on the generative AI image generation side. So I think what I like to think about is creative work is definitely going to get enhanced with AI. Knowledge work, like retrieval of information, that's something we've
Yes.
even used like at Fireflies. Is I can go back, ask any question about any conversation I've had in the last 5 years,
Huge.
and I
Huge.
can basically get the information, right? Like, hey, tell me about what were the top 5 feature requests that our customers asked 3 years ago
Huge.
when we were deploying to the healthcare industry. Boom, right? Like, I think knowledge retrieval is a huge use case, at least for Fireflies. The automation of certain types of mechanical tasks as well. So, I mean, taking notes is one, but like having like GitHub Copilot writing code for me
Yeah.
and helping me accelerate or helping me write blog posts. So there's a lot of those mechanical tasks that are going to also be automated to a greater extent. So it's the coming together of like the creative knowledge retrieval and automation of manual tasks. And I think a lot of people believe that AI was going to impact the physical world, like blue collar work and so forth, earlier, right? Like with robots and stuff, and that knowledge workers were going to be safe for a longer period of time. I think they're still not going to be replaced. I just believe that AI is going to force you to change the way that you work. So instead of one design,
Yes.
you're going to have to come up with 10 iterations and figure out what's the best one.
Yeah.
So I think knowledge work is going to be really, really transformed. As much as like when the internet first came out, or imagine if someone back then said, I will never use email, and if they're still working today, would they still be in
Yeah.
the business?
Not
No,
a
you have to
chance.
learn and adapt, right?
Not a chance.
Adapt.
Yeah,
So I think that's the same thing going to be when someone says, I'm never going to use AI. Like 10 years from now, would they still be relevant if they choose not to evolve?
They will not. I agree with you. I think every business has to now consider, especially startups, they have to consider how they're going to utilize AI inside their applications. Every single one of them. So, Krish, one advice you would give anyone who's starting their own startup?
In this market, really be conscientious about what you're trying to build, because we don't know what 2024 will look like. We don't know if we're going to have high interest rates, another recession, right? So I would really, really advise folks to think about the customer, the propensity for that customer to stick around. And I think some of the best businesses can be built during downturns and recessions.
Oh,
But
most of
you have
them
to be
have.
really, really disciplined. And then ask yourself, like, are you doing a startup because you have a burning desire to solve a problem that's been unfulfilled for you, yourself, and people you know? Or are you doing it because it's glamorous and it's something that you want to check off your check boxes in your 20s? That to experiment as a checkbox thing is probably not the right thing to do in this market. I've
You're not
seen
gonna
so
have the
many
grit.
people who said, you know, I'm making a career decision. I'm going to either go to business school or I'm going to go do a startup right now. And that is really funny to me because both are on the opposite polar ends. Like if you
Yeah.
want to be a perfect middle manager, cookie cutter, take no risks,
Go to
have
school.
like a badge or certificate, absolutely go to business school. That's the right thing for you so that you can go work in a big firm. But to be a startup founder or an entrepreneur means you have no badge, right? Like or
Nope.
certificate. It's all uncertainty.
Yeah.
So I always tell folks like the fact that you're even considering those two
You're
probably
not ready.
means that
You're
you
not
should
ready.
go for the more safe path. Yeah.
No, I love that. And to be frank, you're not going to have the grit. If it's just a try startup world, like if you just think, oh, I think I can make it, you're not going to make it. Like it takes a lot of effort, energy. There's a lot of ups and downs, a lot more downs than ups. And a lot of people can't cope with that. Like realistically, like you, as a founder, you kind of have to think of it this way. You're about to jump off the cliff. You have all the parts for a plane, but you have to assemble it while you're falling, and you hope to God you don't hit the ground and you build it before you hit the ground, right? That's the theory behind it, right? Like you got to be crazy enough to jump off the cliff without anything behind it. Krish, thank you so much. Really appreciate you being at the podcast. I loved having this conversation with you because I think you're so real. And I think a lot of startups need to hear what's real about being a startup. It's not just the glamour of, oh, we hit a $10 million valuation, like we're skyrocketing. There's a lot of blood, tears, and hard work that goes into it before you even get to that, just like you guys did. So love what you guys are doing with Fireflies. I think you guys are gonna crush it, and you guys are already crushing it. You don't even need me to hope for that, but congratulations on that success.
Thank you. Thanks so much, and had a lot of fun.
Awesome. And to everybody else back at home, thank you all for listening to another awesome episode of Founders Corner. And until next time, if you like this, please subscribe, like, and if you think anybody can get some good value out of it, please do share. This really helps us keep the channel going. Until next time, Corridor out.